Get on the hood before I put you there myself!
Officer, state the reason for this stop right now.
Don't play calm with me, I know what you're hiding.
That bag didn't come from my car, and you know it. Then explain why my partner found it beneath your seat. It wasn't there before you searched, and both of you know exactly how it got there.
Price shoved Darius Whitaker against the hood, while Sloan held the sealed powder bag high for the neighbors to see. Darius didn't fight, didn't beg, and didn't look away. He only stared at the evidence number and Sloan's hand. Price leaned closer, smiling like the report had already won. Officer Price had no idea quiet man in cuffs had spent months watching men like him from the other side of the law. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Darius Whitaker drove his unmarked sedan down Maple Grove Lane at exactly 25 miles per hour. The speedometer needle held steady. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Everything about his driving was deliberate and calm. The neighborhood around him looked like a postcard. White picket fences lined perfectly cut lawns. Children's bicycles sat in driveways beside expensive SUVs. American flags hung from front porches. The kind of place where people felt safe, leaving their doors unlocked. Darius had just finished a controlled surveillance meeting 3 blocks away. The DEA operation was moving forward smoothly. His olive shirt felt comfortable against his skin, the federal badge hanging from its chain beneath the fabric where no one could see it. He checked his rearview mirror out of habit. 2 patrol cars had appeared behind him. Their lights stayed dark, but they followed closer than normal traffic. Darius kept driving. He had done nothing wrong. His tail light worked fine. His registration was current. His speed stayed legal. The flashing lights exploded behind him like a sudden storm. Red and blue strobes bounced off house windows and mailboxes. The quiet street transformed into a crime scene in seconds. Darius pulled to the curb smoothly and put the car in park. He placed both hands on top of the steering wheel where they could be seen clearly. His breathing stayed controlled. His military training kicked in automatically. The patrol car doors slammed shut with sharp metallic bangs that echoed between houses. Heavy footsteps approached on asphalt. Officer Nolan Price appeared at the driver's window first. He was a thick-bodied white man in his 40s with pale eyes that looked hungry for trouble. His hand rested near his weapon like he expected a fight. Price tapped the glass with his knuckles. Hard, demanding. Darius lowered the window halfway and kept his hands visible. "Step out before you make this harder than it has to be," Price said. His voice carried the tone of someone who already believed Darius was guilty of something. "What violation did I commit, officer?" Darius asked calmly. Price's jaw tightened. "I said step out. Now." Darius noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Officer Garrett Sloan was walking around the car slowly, studying it like a predator circling prey. Sloan was thinner than Price, but moved with more calculation. His eyes examined the windows, mirrors, and door handles with practiced attention. "I need to know what law I broke," Darius said, keeping his voice steady. Price leaned closer to the window. "Don't make me ask again." Neighbors started coming outside. An older woman in a blue dress stepped onto her porch across the street. A man washing his car in his driveway stopped and stared. 2 children riding bicycles slowed down to watch. Price noticed the audience and smiled. He raised his voice. "Some people think they can drive through neighborhoods where they don't belong," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Think nobody's paying attention to what they're up to." Heat flashed through Darius's chest, but his face stayed calm. He had heard words like these before. He knew exactly what Price was trying to do. Sloan completed his circle around the car and positioned himself near the patrol vehicle. Darius caught a glimpse of him in the side mirror. Sloan's body blocked the dashboard camera in the patrol car. His left hand moved toward a pocket on his tactical vest. The movement was quick, subtle, but Darius saw it. "Step out of the vehicle," Price repeated. His tone had turned sharper. "More aggressive. Keep your hands where I can see them." Darius opened the door slowly and stood up with both palms visible. Price immediately grabbed his arm and spun him around. "Against the hood," Price ordered, forcing Darius toward the front of the sedan, while Sloan moved to the driver's door. The metal cuffs clicked tight around Darius's wrists behind his back. The steel bit into his skin as Price shoved him forward against the warm hood of the sedan. "Stay put," Price growled, pressing his hand between Darius's shoulder blades to pin him in place. The neighbors gathered closer now. The woman in the blue dress had walked to the edge of her porch. A man in a Cardinals baseball cap emerged from the house next door. 3 more people appeared at windows, watching through glass. Like this was afternoon television. Price wanted an audience. Darius could feel it in the way the officer positioned himself, making sure his badge caught the sunlight, ensuring his voice carried across the quiet street. Sloan opened the driver's door and leaned inside. His movements were methodical and practiced. He checked the glove compartment first, then ran his hands along the dashboard and center console. His fingers probed beneath the seats with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Nothing up here?" Sloan called out, his voice casual. Price nodded and pressed harder against Darius's back. "Keep looking." Sloan dropped to his knees beside the open door. His upper body disappeared as he reached deep beneath the driver's seat. The angle put him out of sight from most of the watching neighbors, but Darius could see his reflection in the car's side mirror. Sloan's right hand emerged first, empty. Then his left hand followed, gripping something small and rectangular. A clear plastic bag filled with white powder. The evidence seal along the top edge caught Darius's attention immediately. The serial number was partially visible, DEA 4471. His chest tightened, as recognition hit him like cold water. That bag came from the Riverside Avenue bust 3 weeks ago. 40 kilograms of cocaine seized during a warehouse raid. The DEA had been tracking missing evidence packages from that seizure. This bag should have been locked in federal storage, not hidden under a car seat. Sloan stood up slowly, holding the bag at eye level like a trophy. His face showed practiced surprise, the kind of expression that looked real to civilians but felt rehearsed to trained eyes. Well, Sloan said, turning the bag so the powder was visible. "Look what we got here." Price lifted his hand from Darius's back and walked around to see. His grin spread wide and cruel. "Found this in your car," Price announced, taking the bag from Sloan and raising it high above his head. His voice boomed across the street like a carnival barker. "Right there, under the driver's seat, where you left it." The neighbors leaned forward. Someone took out a phone to record. The woman in blue shook her head in disappointment. Darius studied their movements carefully. Price's left hand stayed near his weapon, while his right held the bag. Sloan positioned himself to block any clear view of the car's interior from the street. Both officers kept their body cameras turned away from the sedan's front seat. These men had done this before. "I don't know what you thought you were doing in this neighborhood," Price continued, playing to his audience, "but you picked the wrong street to peddle your poison. Men like you always have some excuse," Price said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Always got some story about how it ain't yours, how somebody else put it there, how you're just an innocent victim." Darius kept his voice calm and clear. "You should be very careful about the story you're creating here, officer." Price laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the houses. "Story? The only story here is what we found in your car. That's all the story anybody needs." Sloan moved closer to Price, close enough that their conversation would seem private to the watching neighbors. But Darius's hearing was sharp, trained by years of surveillance work. "The bag is clean enough," Sloan whispered, his words barely audible. "No prints, no traces. Should hold up fine." Price nodded slightly, still holding the evidence bag high where everyone could see it. Price grabbed Darius by the shoulder and shoved him toward the patrol car. The force was unnecessary and deliberate, designed to make him stumble in front of the watching neighbors. Darius kept his balance, but felt his shirt collar pull tight against his neck. "Move it!" Price barked, his hand pressing between Darius's shoulder blades. "Time to take a ride downtown?" Sloan followed behind them, keeping the evidence bag raised in his gloved hand like a banner. He made sure every neighbor could see the white powder through the clear plastic. The performance continued even as they walked. 40 grams, easy," Sloan called out to Price, loud enough for the street to hear. "Maybe more. That's distribution weight." Darius took measured steps toward the black and white patrol car. He did not hurry or drag his feet. His breathing stayed controlled. His eyes tracked the positions of both officers, the angle of the patrol car's dashboard camera, and the neighbors still recording with their phones. Price shoved him again, harder this time. The rough movement yanked Darius's shirt collar to the left. The olive fabric pulled tight against his throat, and something metallic caught the afternoon sunlight. A thin steel chain slipped out from beneath his shirt, the kind that held official credentials. Sloane saw it first. His steps slowed. The evidence bag lowered slightly in his hand, his eyes fixed on the chain with the intensity of a man who recognized danger when it revealed itself. "Price," Sloane said quietly. But Price was still focused on his performance. He grabbed Darius's arm and yanked him forward again, trying to maintain the momentum of humiliation. The chain pulled completely free. A leather credential case dropped against Darius's chest, suspended by the steel links. The gold badge inside caught the light through the clear plastic window. 3 letters were visible in bold black text: DEA. The street went silent. Price's hand froze on Darius's arm. His eyes dropped to the badge, then shot back up to Darius's face. The color drained from his cheeks like water leaving a sink. Sloane stood motionless behind them, still holding the planted evidence bag. The woman in blue lowered her phone. The man with the dog stopped recording. Even the children on the porch became still. Darius turned his head slowly to look Price directly in the eye. His voice carried clearly across the quiet street. "You just planted evidence on a federal agent." Price's mouth opened, but no words came out. His grip on Darius's arm loosened. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, like a man realizing he had walked into the wrong room. Then his pride kicked in. His jaw hardened, his shoulders squared. The uncertainty disappeared, replaced by something more dangerous. "Nice try," Price said, his voice rising back to its earlier volume. "Real nice try, but that badge don't mean nothing to me." He reached out and yanked the credential case free from the chain. The metal links scraped against Darius's neck as the badge came away in Price's fist. "Impersonating a law enforcement officer," Price announced to the street. "That's a felony in this state. Makes everything worse for you." Sloane shifted nervously behind them. "Price, maybe we should." "Should what?" Price cut him off. "This fraud thinks he can flash some fake badge and walk away from a drug arrest? Not on my watch." Price held up the DEA credentials for the neighbors to see, just like he had done with the evidence bag. "Probably bought this online," he said loudly. "These people will try anything to get out of trouble. Fake badges, fake stories, fake tears. I've seen it all before." Darius remained perfectly still. He did not argue or defend the authenticity of his credentials. He did not raise his voice or make threats. He simply watched Price make decision after decision that would be impossible to explain later. "Sloane," Price ordered, his voice sharp with authority, "seize that badge as evidence. Take his phone and car keys too. Everything goes into custody." Sloane hesitated for just a moment. His eyes met Darius's briefly, and something uncertain passed between them. Then he stepped forward and held out his free hand. "Phone and keys," Sloane said quietly. Darius reached into his pocket with careful movements and removed both items. He placed them in Sloane's palm without resistance. Every illegal seizure strengthened the case that was building in real time. Price opened the rear door of the patrol car and put his hand on top of Darius's head. "Get in," he commanded, "and don't even think about running that mouth anymore. Federal agent." He laughed harshly. "Right." Price pushed Darius into the back seat and slammed the door. The sound echoed down the quiet street like a gunshot. Through the rear window, Darius watched Sloane hurry back toward the sedan, the evidence bag still in his hand. The officer's movements were faster now, more urgent. He was going back to search harder, to find anything else that might complicate their story. Price climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Darius sat in the rear of the patrol car, his wrists still cuffed behind his back. The plastic seat was hard against his spine. The metal cage separated him from the front seats like a barrier between worlds. Price grabbed the radio microphone from the dashboard and keyed it twice. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12 with a Code 7 arrest," Price said into the radio. His voice was calm now, professional. "One adult male in custody for possession with intent to distribute, requesting transport and booking." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the speaker. "Copy, Unit 12. What's your 20? "Maple Street, near the elementary school," Price replied. also requesting evidence processing for approximately 2 ounces of suspected cocaine recovered from the vehicle. Darius listened to every word. Price was creating an official record, building a false story that would become harder to destroy with each radio transmission. The lie was spreading through the system like poison in clear water. Through the rear window, Darius watched Sloan work on the sedan. The officer had pulled out a small flashlight and was searching the interior with desperate intensity. He checked the glove compartment, under the seats, behind the visors. His movements were quick and sharp. Sloan opened the driver's door wider and leaned inside. He aimed his flashlight upward toward the rearview mirror. Then he stopped moving completely. Even from the patrol car, Darius could see Sloan's body language change. His shoulders tensed, his head tilted forward like a man studying something he did not want to find. Sloan reached up with both hands and pulled something small and dark away from the mirror mount. He held it in his palm, examining it under the flashlight beam. A federal surveillance camera, no bigger than a matchbox. Sloan's head whipped around toward the patrol car. His eyes found Darius through the rear window. Fear replaced confusion on his face. Without hesitation, Sloan dropped the camera onto the asphalt and crushed it under his boot heel. He ground it into pieces, making sure nothing remained intact. Price watched through the rear-view mirror. "What you got, Sloan?" "Nothing important," Sloan called back, but his voice carried strain that had not been there before. 2 blocks away, inside a white cargo van parked behind a gas station, 3 federal agents stared at monitors that had gone black 30 seconds earlier. "Signal's dead," said the technician, adjusting dials that would not bring the feed back. "They found the camera." Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss stood behind the monitors, her arms crossed, her face sharp with concentration. She was 48 years old with silver-streaked brown hair pulled into a tight bun. Her dark suit was pressed perfectly, despite the long surveillance shift. "How much did we get?" she asked. The technician rewound the digital recording. The screen showed clear footage of Sloan reaching into his vest pocket, palming the plastic evidence bag, and sliding it beneath the driver's seat, while Price blocked the patrol car's camera angle. "Everything," the technician said. "The plant, the seizure, the badge reveal. All of it." Agent Torres, sitting at the communications desk, reached for his radio. "I can have 6 cars there in 4 minutes. We take them now before they reach the station." "No." Lenora's voice was firm. "We preserve the operation." Torres turned in his chair. "Ma'am, they just arrested a federal agent on false charges. They arrested Special Agent Whitaker on charges connected to evidence that should not exist," Lenora corrected. "That bag came from somewhere. The serial number on that evidence seal connects to Operation Steel Track. This is bigger than 2 patrol officers." She pointed at the frozen image on the monitor showing Sloan holding the planted bag. "We have been chasing missing federal narcotics for 8 months. Price and Sloan just handed us proof that local police are connected to the theft. If we move now, we lose the chance to trace the pipeline." Agent Torres looked uncomfortable. "What about Whitaker?" "Whitaker is disciplined enough to handle 12 hours in custody if it means exposing a larger conspiracy," Lenora said. "He would make the same choice." Back in the patrol car, Darius watched Sloan kick the camera fragments into the storm drain. The officer's panic was visible even from a distance. Sloan kept looking around, checking windows, scanning parked cars. He was afraid there might be more cameras. That fear told Darius everything he needed to know. This was not the first time these officers had planted evidence. Sloan's expertise with camera angles and evidence seals suggested a practiced operation. Price put the patrol car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As they passed the sedan, Darius saw Sloan still searching, still worried, still checking his surroundings like a man who knew he had made a mistake, but did not know how big it was. In the van 2 blocks away, Lenora Voss opened her laptop and began typing an emergency federal preservation order. Every piece of evidence, every radio transmission, every booking document would be protected by federal authority within the hour. Price turned onto the main road, driving toward the precinct where Captain Mallory waited. The patrol car pulled into the precinct garage through a side entrance that avoided the main desk and public areas. Price cut the engine and sat still for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Remember what we talked about," he said to Sloan through the radio. "Simple possession, resisting commands. No federal complications. Sloane's voice crackled back. "Copy that." Price opened the rear door and pulled Darius out by his elbow. The garage was dimly lit with concrete walls that absorbed sound. No witnesses. No cameras pointing this direction. "Move," Price said, pushing Darius toward a steel door marked Booking. Inside, the booking area was a narrow hallway lined with holding cells and processing desks. The air smelled like disinfectant and fear. Price guided Darius to a metal chair beside a fingerprint station, while Sloane entered through another door, carrying the evidence bag in a clear plastic container. Darius studied the room without moving his head. Exit locations, camera positions, radio frequencies. The booking sergeant sat behind bulletproof glass, filling out forms with mechanical indifference. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway before Price could begin the intake process. Captain Everett Mallory appeared around the corner, walking with the measured pace of a man who owned every space he entered. He was 55 years old with silver hair and a perfectly pressed uniform that carried no wrinkles despite the late hour. His face was calm, controlled, and completely unsurprised. Too unsurprised. "Officers," Mallory said, nodding to Price and Sloane. "Situation report." Price straightened. "Traffic violation turned into a narcotics arrest, Captain. Subject was carrying what appears to be a federal identification, but we need verification." "Of course you do," Mallory said, his voice carrying authority that made the booking sergeant stop typing. "Federal impersonation is a serious charge." Darius watched Mallory's face carefully. The captain's expression showed no confusion about the circumstances, no questions about why 2 patrol officers had called him after hours, no surprise that a routine traffic stop had escalated this far. He had been expecting this call. "Process him normally," Mallory continued. "Verify the identification through proper channels. Impound the vehicle under standard narcotics seizure protocol." Sloane set the evidence container on the booking desk. "Bag was hidden under the driver's seat, Captain. Tested positive for cocaine in the field." Mallory examined the bag without touching it, his eyes focusing on the evidence seal for several seconds longer than necessary. "Chain of custody?" he asked. "Documented from discovery to booking," Sloane replied. "Everything by regulation." Price began writing his report on a clipboard, his pen moving quickly across the form. Darius could see the lies taking shape from his angle. Suspicious driving patterns, failure to comply with lawful orders, contraband discovered during lawful search. The booking phone rang, cutting through the mechanical process. The sergeant answered, listened, then looked up with uncertainty. "Captain, federal prosecutor on line 2. Says she needs to speak with you about a federal agent." Mallory's expression did not change, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Tell her I will return the call after booking procedures are complete." "She says it is urgent, sir." "I heard what she said." Mallory's voice carried ice that made the sergeant reach for the phone immediately. Darius heard the muffled conversation through the handset, a woman's voice, sharp and insistent. The sergeant kept glancing at Mallory, clearly uncomfortable with the federal pressure. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. I will relay the message." The sergeant hung up and looked at Mallory. "Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss. She is demanding immediate release of Special Agent Darius Whitaker and preservation of all evidence, radio logs, and video footage." Mallory nodded slowly. "Did you inform her that we are following standard verification procedures?" "Yes, sir." "Then continue processing." As Price finished his false report, Darius caught sight of Mallory's keycard hanging from his belt. The plastic card bore the standard precinct logo, but beneath it was a smaller symbol, a stylized evidence room seal with a serial number prefix. The same prefix he had seen on the planted drug bag. The realization hit him like cold water. This was not 2 officers making a desperate mistake. This was not patrol-level corruption. The evidence room seal, Mallory's prepared responses, the coordinated lies, everything pointed to an organized operation that reached into the department's command structure. Sloane logged the evidence bag into the system, typing numbers that would create an official record of Darius's possession. Price signed his report with confident strokes that suggested years of practice writing fiction disguised as police work. Mallory watched it all with the calm oversight of a supervisor ensuring quality control. The phone rang again. This time, The sergeant looked directly at Mallory before answering. Precinct booking. A pause. Yes, she called before. No, sir, he has not been released. Another pause. I understand. The sergeant hung up and addressed Mallory with visible nervousness. That was the federal building. They are sending agents to verify Agent Whitaker's identity and status. How long? Mallory asked. 20 minutes, sir. Mallory checked his watch, then looked at Price and Sloane. Finish the paperwork. Make sure everything is documented correctly. He turned toward Darius with the expression of a man solving a simple administrative problem. Agent Whitaker, if that is indeed your name, you will be placed in interview room 3 while we sort this out, through proper channels. I am sure you understand the need for thorough verification. Mallory gestured toward a hallway lined with doors. Officer Price will escort you. As they walked toward the interrogation room, Mallory called after them. Officer Price, make sure that paperwork is airtight. Every detail, every timestamp, every witness statement. Price nodded. Yes, sir. Mallory watched them disappear around the corner, then pulled out his phone and walked toward his office, already dialing a number that would not appear on any official log. The interrogation room smelled like old coffee and fear. Darius sat at a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands free, but the door locked from the outside. Through the one-way mirror, he could see officers moving in the hallway, their voices muffled by thick glass and concrete walls. The precinct had settled into evening shift routine, fewer voices, longer shadows. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed with the steady hum of a building that never truly slept. Price appeared in the doorway carrying a clipboard and a pen. His earlier swagger had been replaced by focused determination. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Darius with the confidence of a man who had done this many times before. Let's make this simple, Price said, placing the clipboard between them. You sign a statement saying the drugs were yours. Maybe you were using them for personal reasons. Maybe you were planning to sell them. I do not really care which story you pick. Darius did not touch the paper. I have nothing to sign. Everyone has something to sign when they sit in this chair. Not today. Price tapped the pen against the table. You think that badge makes you special? You think federal agents do not get arrested like everybody else? I think you planted evidence on the wrong person. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air between them. Price leaned back in his chair, studying Darius with the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered his prey. Your car is impounded. Your phone is locked up. Your federal friends are not here. Price smiled. It is just you and me, and this statement. Before Darius could respond, commotion erupted in the front lobby. Voices rose above the typical precinct noise. A woman's voice, clear and firm, demanding answers. Price frowned and stood up. Wait here. He left the room, locking the door behind him. Through the mirror, Darius watched Price walk toward the front desk, where a black woman in her late 60s stood facing the booking sergeant. She wore a navy blue dress and carried herself with the dignity of someone who had taught children for 30 years. Ruth Whitaker had arrived. Darius's chest tightened. His mother had already endured one son's false arrest. Now she was living through it again. Price approached her with the predatory smile he reserved for people he thought could not fight back. Ma'am, visiting hours are over. Ruth turned to face him without stepping backward. I am here about my son, Darius Whitaker. I was told he was arrested. That is correct. Your son was caught with narcotics in his vehicle. Ruth's expression did not change. That is a lie. Price's smile widened. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult. Sometimes we do not know our family members as well as we think we do. I know my son. Do you? Because the evidence says otherwise. Price moved closer, using his height to intimidate her. Maybe you raised him to respect the law, but somewhere along the way, he chose a different path. Ruth looked up at him with steady eyes. Officer, I have already watched one son get crushed by false charges from men who looked exactly like you. I will not stand here and let you lie about my other boy. The booking sergeant shifted uncomfortably behind the desk. Other officers had stopped their conversations to watch the exchange. Price's voice turned cruel. Maybe the problem is not the system, lady. Maybe the problem is how you raised them. Ruth's hands tightened around her purse, but her voice remained calm. The problem is men who hide behind badges while they destroy families. Captain Mallory emerged from his office, having monitored the conversation. He approached with the polished authority of a supervisor managing a delicate situation. "Mrs. Whitaker, I understand your concern. Your son is being processed according to standard procedures. I want to see him. That can be arranged. Briefly." Mallory led Ruth toward the interrogation room hallway, while Price followed behind them, his expression smug with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had broken another family's spirit. Through the glass, Darius saw his mother approaching. Her face showed the strain of reliving old nightmares, but her posture remained straight. She had survived Marcus's false conviction. She would survive this. Mallory stopped at the observation window and gestured toward Darius. 5 minutes. No conversation. Ruth looked through the glass at her son. Darius met her eyes and saw the pain she was carrying, the same pain that had lived in her house for 15 years since Marcus was taken. But he also saw strength, determination, the refusal to let corrupt men break what she had built. Ruth placed her hand against the glass. Darius stood and approached the mirror from his side, placing his palm against hers with only the barrier between them. In that moment, he mouthed 2 words clearly enough for her to read his lips. "Call Lenora." Ruth nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding immediately. Mallory checked his watch. "Time is up." Ruth stepped away from the window but did not hurry. She looked at Mallory with the expression of a woman who had spent decades managing difficult children and would not be intimidated by grown men acting like bullies. "Captain, my son is a federal agent. This arrest is a mistake. That will be determined through proper verification. How long will that take?" "As long as necessary." Ruth walked back toward the lobby with steady dignity, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Price followed behind her, wearing a smirk that suggested he had enjoyed every moment of her humiliation. At the front desk, Ruth turned back to face him one final time. "Officer Price, I want you to remember something. I raised both my sons to stand straight when men like you tried to bend them. That has not changed." She walked through the front door into the evening air, leaving Price standing beside the booking sergeant with his smirk intact and his confidence unshaken. But Darius had seen what Price missed. Ruth Whitaker was not broken. She was angry, and she was already reaching for her phone. The glass doors of the precinct burst open as Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss strode through the lobby, flanked by 2 federal agents in dark suits. Her heels struck the floor with the rhythm of authority, and the emergency paperwork in her leather portfolio crinkled with each determined step. Officer Price looked up from the booking desk, his confident expression faltering as he recognized the federal shield clipped to Lenora's blazer. Behind her, Agent Martinez and Agent Park positioned themselves near the entrance, their presence transforming the lobby from a local police station into a crime scene under federal oversight. "I am Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "I am here for Special Agent Darius Whitaker." Desk Sergeant Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ma'am, you will need to speak with Captain Mallory." "Yes. Where is he?" Mallory emerged from the hallway before Rodriguez could answer, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles as he approached with the measured calm of a supervisor preparing for a difficult conversation. "Ms. Voss, this is unexpected." Lenora placed the emergency paperwork on the desk between them. "Federal preservation order, all body camera footage, radio communications, booking documents, evidence logs, and impound records related to Special Agent Whitaker are to be secured immediately." Price stepped closer, sweat beginning to form along his hairline. "Look, lady, your boy was caught with narcotics. Badge or no badge, that is still a crime." Lenora turned toward him with the cold precision of a prosecutor who had destroyed bigger men than him. "Officer Price, I suggest you remain quiet while adults handle federal business." Sloan backed toward the hallway, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone in the room. His hands trembled slightly as he pretended to organize paperwork that did not need organizing. Mallory reviewed the court order with practiced calm, but Lenora noticed his jaw tighten when he reached the evidence preservation requirements. "This appears to be in order. Agent Whitaker will be released pending verification." "Verification of what?" "Standard procedure for credential authentication." "Captain, that man has been a DEA agent for 8 years. His credentials are not in question. The planted evidence is." The room went silent. Martinez and Park shifted their positions slightly, creating better angles of observation. Rodriguez stopped typing. Price's sweating increased. Mallory's voice remained steady. That is a serious accusation. It is a documented fact. Remove Agent Whitaker from restraints immediately. 20 minutes later, Darius emerged from the interrogation room with his wrists finally free of handcuffs. His shirt was wrinkled from the arrest, but his expression remained controlled as he joined Lenora near the booking desk. Chain of custody documentation for the recovered narcotics, Lenora demanded, extending her hand toward Price. Price fumbled through his vest pockets before producing a crumpled evidence form. The bag sat sealed inside a clear container on the desk between them, its official markings visible under the fluorescent lights. Lenora examined the form carefully, then looked at the evidence seal on the bag. This serial number will be cross-referenced with federal databases tonight. Sloan moved further down the hallway, his retreat noticed by Agent Park, who quietly adjusted his position to maintain visual contact. For a moment, the corrupt officers appeared to have lost completely. Price wiped sweat from his forehead. Sloan refused to meet anyone's eyes. The evidence was secured, the paperwork was documented, and federal oversight was established. Then Mallory delivered the counter-strike that turned victory into defeat. Ms. Voss, I need to inform you of some complications that developed during the arrest. Lenora's eyes narrowed. What complications? The patrol unit's body camera experienced a technical malfunction during the stop. The footage is corrupted. Convenient. Additionally, during the lawful search of the vehicle, a small recording device was discovered and damaged. We were unaware it was federal equipment. Darius felt his stomach drop, but his expression did not change. The car camera had been their strongest evidence. Without it, the case became much more difficult. Mallory continued with devastating calm. Finally, Agent Whitaker's vehicle has already been transported to the city impound garage for processing under standard narcotic seizure protocols. The false victory collapsed entirely. The body camera was gone. The federal surveillance equipment was destroyed. The car was being moved where federal agents could not immediately access it. Lenora's jaw tightened, but she maintained professional composure. That vehicle contains federal equipment and must be preserved exactly as seized. Of course, the impound facility is secure. Darius knew better. Secure meant isolated. It meant Price and Sloan would have access tonight, while federal agents were delayed by paperwork and jurisdiction protocols. Agent Martinez approached Lenora with a concerned expression. "Ma'am, the mobile unit lost contact with the vehicle tracker 20 minutes ago." The final piece of bad news landed. Not only was the car moved, but its federal tracking systems had been disabled. By morning, any remaining evidence inside it would be gone. Mallory smiled with polite professionalism. Agent Whitaker is free to go. The investigation will proceed through proper channels. Lenora gathered her paperwork with controlled frustration. There was nothing more she could accomplish at the precinct that evening. The damage was done, and the corrupt officers had bought themselves time to clean up their mistakes. Darius stepped toward the glass doors, his freedom hollow because his car was being stripped somewhere in the darkness beyond the precinct parking lot. As he pushed through the exit into the cool evening air, he understood the fight was just beginning. The federal sedan cut through the evening traffic toward the city impound facility, its headlights sweeping across empty industrial streets. Darius sat in the passenger seat beside Lenora, while Detective Mara Ellison occupied the back, her face tense with internal conflict. Mara had approached them in the precinct parking lot 20 minutes earlier. She was a 44-year-old local detective with graying brown hair and careful eyes who had worked inside the department long enough to recognize patterns of corruption she could never prove. "Agent Whitaker," she had said quietly, "your car is not safe where they took it." Now she leaned forward between the front seats, speaking in urgent whispers. "Sloan left the station 15 minutes before you were released. He took the back exit with 2 plainclothes officers from Mallory's unit." Lenora glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "How do you know Sloan's movements?" "Because I have been watching them for 2 years. Missing evidence, false reports, suspects who disappear from booking logs. I just never had enough proof to challenge a captain." Darius studied the dark buildings rolling past the windows. "What kind of proof?" "Small things. Evidence room keys that do not match assignment sheets. Arrest reports filed after suspects are already released. Radio calls that never appear in dispatch logs. The impound garage sat at the end of a narrow industrial street, surrounded by chain-link fencing and poorly lit by overhead security lamps. Lenora parked across the street behind a row of dumpsters that provided visual cover. "There," Mara whispered, pointing toward the main building. "Side door is propped open. Sloane's personal vehicle is behind the fence." Through the garage's dirty windows, they could see dim work lights moving inside. Shadows passed between the parked vehicles, confirming multiple people were already stripping Darius's sedan. Lenora checked her service weapon and radio. "I am calling for backup." "No," Darius said firmly. "Radio traffic will warn them. Give me 5 minutes. This is not a one-man operation. It is if we want to catch them with evidence still in their hands." Mara opened her door quietly. "I know the building layout. There are 3 exits, and they will use the back one if they panic." Darius moved across the dark street with controlled steps, avoiding the pools of light from the security lamps. The chain-link fence had been cut near the side entrance, creating a gap wide enough for a person to slip through without using the main gate. Inside the garage, he could hear metal scraping against metal and low voices, arguing over what to remove first. His sedan sat near the center of the building, surrounded by other impounded vehicles. 3 men worked around it with handheld lights and small tools. Sloane knelt beside the driver's door, reaching beneath the dashboard to disconnect remaining surveillance wires. A tall plainclothes officer with thick arms searched the trunk area, while a shorter man with a shaved head examined the seats for hidden compartments. Darius approached from behind a large pickup truck, using the shadows and engine noise from a nearby compressor to mask his footsteps. He was 15 feet away when the shorter officer turned and spotted him. "Sloane!" the man shouted, reaching for something at his belt. The confrontation erupted immediately. The tall officer spun around and swung a heavy metal flashlight toward Darius's head in a vicious arc. Darius shifted left, letting the flashlight whistle past his ear, then stepped inside the man's reach and grabbed his wrist with both hands. The shorter officer charged from the other side, throwing wild punches that Darius absorbed on his shoulder and forearm while maintaining control of the flashlight wielder. Darius used footwork to pivot the tall man between himself and the shorter attacker, then drove the man's own wrist backward until he dropped the flashlight with a sharp cry of pain. Sloane scrambled around the sedan, trying to reach the side exit, while the other 2 officers pressed their attack. The shorter man landed a hard punch to Darius's ribs that sent pain shooting through his torso, but Darius immediately redirected him into the sedan's open door, using the man's momentum against him. The tall officer recovered and lunged forward again, but Darius caught him in a wrist lock and drove him backward into a metal workbench covered with tools. The man's back struck the edge with a heavy thud, and he crumpled to the concrete floor. The shorter officer tried to circle behind him, but the narrow space between vehicles limited his movement. Darius pressed the advantage, using the confined area to pin the man against the sedan's rear quarter panel. A quick joint manipulation to the man's elbow ended his resistance. Sloane reached the side door, but Darius lunged forward and caught the back of his jacket just as he tried to slip through the exit. The fabric tore as Sloane pulled away, leaving Darius holding a strip of evidence tape that had been attached to the jacket's inner pocket. Sloane disappeared into the darkness outside, while Darius stood breathing hard in the dim garage, his ribs aching from the punch, but his mind immediately focused on the torn evidence tape in his hand. Under the work light, he could see a partial serial number printed on the adhesive strip, DEA 47291. The remaining digits were torn away, but those numbers were enough. Darius recognized them immediately from an old case file that had haunted his family for 15 years. Marcus Whitaker's arrest, his brother's false conviction. The same evidence room system that had destroyed Marcus was now being used against him. The federal office building stood dark against the night sky, but the lights on the 7th floor remained bright. Darius sat at a computer terminal in the DEA Records Division, his fingers moving across the keyboard as he entered the partial serial number from the torn evidence tape. Lenora paced behind him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Those numbers should connect to the master evidence database going back 20 years. If this tape came from federal seizures, we will find the original case. Mara Ellison stood near the window, watching the empty street below. She had never been inside a federal building before, but her expression showed determination rather than nervousness. Mallory's unit has been too careful for too long. If you can prove they recycled evidence, it breaks their whole system. The database search loaded slowly, filtering through thousands of evidence entries. Darius typed additional parameters to narrow the results. Evidence seals, narcotics cases, local police cooperation, missing inventory reports. The screen flashed, and a single file appeared. DEA 47291B, seized narcotics evidence. Marcus T. Whitaker, case file. Darius stared at the screen without moving. His brother's name glowed in blue letters next to the same serial number sequence he had torn from Sloane's jacket. "What is it?" Lenora asked, moving closer to read over his shoulder. Darius's voice came out quiet and controlled. "My brother. The same evidence seal system was used against Marcus 15 years ago." Mara stepped away from the window. "Your brother was arrested by the same unit?" Darius opened the case file, scanning through pages of arrest reports, evidence logs, and court documents. The details made his chest tighten with recognition. Marcus had been stopped for a broken taillight near the same suburban neighborhood. 2 officers searched his car after claiming they smelled marijuana. They found a sealed bag of cocaine beneath his driver's seat. The arresting officers were listed as N. Price and G. Sloane. "They have been doing this for 15 years, Darius said, his hands steady on the keyboard despite the rage building in his chest. "The same method, the same officers, the same lies." Lenora leaned forward, reading the evidence descriptions. "Look at the chain of custody. The narcotics were logged into evidence, but the paperwork shows irregular handling, multiple transfers, missing signatures, unexplained storage periods." Darius scrolled through more pages, finding witness statements, lab reports, and judicial notes. Marcus had insisted in court that the drugs were planted. He described exactly what Darius had experienced. Officers blocking cameras, one man searching while another distracted, a bag appearing from nowhere. The judge had dismissed Marcus's claims as desperate lies. Mara studied the arrest location on the report. "Same neighborhood, same street pattern they used on you. They target that area because it has limited camera coverage and puts pressure on black drivers who feel out of place." Darius found the sentencing page. Marcus had received 8 years for narcotics possession with intent to distribute. He served 6 years before early release. The conviction destroyed his teaching career, his marriage, and his ability to find stable work. "The evidence room logs show something else," Lenora said, pointing to a section near the bottom of the file. "The cocaine from Marcus's case was supposed to be destroyed after the conviction. Instead, it was transferred back to active investigation status under Captain Mallory's authorization." Darius understood immediately. They recycled it, put it back on the street through controlled seizures, then used it to frame other people. The pattern became clear as they searched deeper into the database. Over 15 years, dozens of similar cases appeared. Black men stopped for minor violations, drugs found in impossible locations, evidence seals matching previous seizures, paperwork that disappeared when families tried to challenge the arrests. Mallory's unit had perfected a system. Seize drugs from real dealers, use them to frame innocent people, force plea bargains to avoid trials, then recycle the same narcotics for the next frame job. The evidence room became a warehouse for manufactured convictions. "How many lives did they destroy?" Mara asked, scrolling through case summaries. Darius counted at least 30 files with matching patterns. 30 men whose families watched them get handcuffed, humiliated, and disappeared into the system. 30 convictions built on lies. His brother had not been unlucky. He had been targeted by a criminal conspiracy wearing police badges. "We can reopen all of these cases," Lenora said, her prosecutor's instincts taking control. "If we can prove the evidence was recycled, every conviction connected to those serial numbers becomes invalid." Darius printed Marcus's complete file, watching his brother's mugshot emerge from the laser printer. Marcus looked younger, defiant, and heartbroken all at once. The same expression Darius had probably worn in the patrol car hours earlier. He thought about Ruth, who had watched both her sons get handcuffed by the same corrupt officers. She had carried that pain for 15 years, never knowing the truth, but never stopping her belief that Marcus was innocent. "This is not just about clearing my name anymore," Darius said quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "We are going to reopen everything, every case, every conviction, every lie they built their careers on." Lenora printed the evidence logs as Mara gathered the scattered pages. The federal office felt different now, like a war room where justice was finally being organized after years of delay. Outside the window, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that a 15-year conspiracy was about to be exposed under the bright lights of a federal investigation. The federal office hummed with late-night energy as Darius typed warrant requests on his laptop. Coffee cups sat cold on the desk beside printed case files. Lenora worked through legal precedents on her tablet, while Mara cross-referenced internal police databases on a borrowed computer. "I found 12 more cases with matching evidence seals," Mara said, rubbing her tired eyes. "All black defendants, all minor traffic stops that escalated to narcotics charges. The pattern goes back to when Mallory first made captain." Darius saved another warrant application. "How long before we can execute these?" "Federal judge reviews them at 7 a.m., Lenora answered, checking her phone. "By noon, we can have agents at the evidence room, Mallory's office, and Price's house simultaneously." The work felt methodical, precise, and hopeful. For the first time since the arrest, Darius believed the system was finally working correctly. Evidence was being documented. Laws were being followed. Justice was being organized through proper channels. Then, Mara's police radio crackled to life. "Detective Ellison, report to headquarters immediately. Administrative review pending." Mara stared at the radio. "It's 4 in the morning. Admin reviews do not happen at 4 in the morning." Darius understood first. "Mallory knows we were at the impound garage. He knows you helped us." Before Mara could respond, her phone buzzed with text messages. Her partner, her sergeant, and the watch commander all sent the same instruction: report for immediate suspension, pending investigation of misconduct during the Whitaker arrest. "They are cutting you off," Lenora said grimly, "isolating our inside source." Mara gathered her files, her jaw tight with controlled anger. "I knew this would happen eventually. 15 years I have watched good cases get buried, evidence disappear, and honest officers get transferred to dead-end assignments. I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up when it mattered," Darius told her. "That takes courage." After Mara left, Darius and Lenora continued preparing federal warrants. They worked in focused silence until Darius's phone rang at 5:30 a.m. "Mom?" he answered immediately. Ruth's voice was steady but strained. "Someone broke my front window tonight. Left me something on the porch." Darius was already reaching for his keys. "Are you hurt?" "No, baby, but I think you should come here." 20 minutes later, Darius and Lenora pulled into Ruth's driveway as dawn light touched the quiet neighborhood. Glass sparkled on the front porch like scattered diamonds. The window had been smashed with a brick that still lay among the pieces. Ruth opened the door before they could knock. She wore her blue robe and slippers, her gray hair neat despite being woken in the middle of the night. In her hand, she held a folded piece of paper. "They left this," she said, handing Darius the note. The message was printed in block letters. "Drop the case or your family pays more." No signature, no direct threats, just enough menace to frighten most people into silence. Darius felt rage build in his chest, hot and dangerous. Someone had come to his mother's house. Someone had terrorized a 68-year-old woman because her son refused to accept being framed. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. Ruth shook her head firmly. "I am not leaving my home because corrupt men want to scare me. I lived through your father's death, Marcus's conviction, and 30 years of teaching in difficult schools. Broken glass does not make me run." Lenora examined the brick and the note carefully. "We can dust for prints, check security cameras in the neighborhood." "They were smart enough to use gloves and avoid the cameras," Ruth said, "but they were stupid enough to think I would break." She looked directly at Darius, her brown eyes sharp with the wisdom that had guided him through childhood. "Do not let this pain make you careless," she said. "That is exactly what Mallory wants. He wants you angry, reckless, and making mistakes. Stay disciplined. Stay focused. Let the law work. Darius's phone buzzed with news alerts. His heart sank as he read the headlines. Corrupt DEA agent caught with drugs appeared across multiple local news sites. Below the headlines, edited video footage showed only the moment when Price seized his badge, cutting out everything that proved the drugs were planted. The news made him look exactly like what Mallory wanted, a dirty federal agent caught and exposed by honest local police. Lenora read over his shoulder, her face grim. Mallory leaked this overnight. He is controlling the narrative before our warrants get approved. Darius looked around Ruth's broken porch as sunrise painted the neighborhood in soft gold. Glass crunched under his shoes. His mother stood beside him, refusing to show fear. His career was being destroyed on morning television. Mara was suspended and powerless. Every system that should have protected the truth had been turned against him. He stood there in the growing daylight, feeling completely alone against an enemy that controlled the local police, the evidence room, the media narrative, and the willingness to threaten innocent families. Mallory had struck first, and the damage felt overwhelming. At Ruth Whitaker's house, Darius sat on the front steps with his laptop balanced on his knees, reviewing security footage from the neighborhood cameras. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the broken glass that still glittered on the porch. Ruth moved inside, sweeping up the smaller pieces with quiet determination. Lenora paced near the driveway, speaking rapidly into her phone with federal marshals about protection details. "We need someone here within 2 hours," she said firmly. "This is a witness intimidation case tied to federal corruption charges." Darius scrolled through the footage frame by frame, studying every angle of yesterday's arrest. He had watched it dozens of times, but something nagged at him. The patrol car camera had been blocked. The DEA surveillance camera had been destroyed, but arrests happened on public streets. Someone else might have been watching. He focused on the vehicles parked along the street during the arrest. Most were empty. A few neighbors had come outside after the confrontation started, but one pickup truck had been there before Price and Sloan arrived. The truck sat directly across from where Darius had been stopped, positioned perfectly to see the entire arrest from beginning to end. "Lenora," he called, "look at this." She finished her call and walked over, studying the laptop screen over his shoulder. Darius pointed to the blue pickup. "This truck was already parked when I got pulled over. The driver never got out, but you can see someone sitting behind the wheel. Can you get a license plate?" He zoomed in on the rear bumper. The resolution was poor, but the numbers were barely visible. "I can make out most of it." Lenora called Mara, who was still suspended but answering her phone. "We need a registration check," Lenora said, reading off the partial plate number. "Blue Chevy pickup, older model." Mara's voice came through clearly. "Give me 5 minutes." While they waited, Darius studied the truck's position more carefully. The driver had a perfect view of both the arrest and the planted evidence. If that person had been recording, his phone rang with Mara's callback. "Walter Grayson," Mara said, 72 years old, retired from the VA hospital, clean record, lives on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the arrest scene. "We are going there now," Lenora said. They left Ruth with a federal agent who arrived within minutes, then drove directly to Walter Grayson's address. The house was small but well-maintained, with military precision in the lawn care and flag placement. Walter answered the door cautiously. He was a thin man with gray hair and steady hands, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. His eyes showed the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust authority too quickly. "Mr. Grayson?" Lenora showed her federal credentials. "I am Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss. This is Special Agent Darius Whitaker. We would like to ask you about something you might have seen yesterday." Walter's expression tightened. "What kind of something?" "An arrest that happened on Oak Street," Darius said calmly. "You were parked across the street in your pickup truck." Walter glanced nervously between them. "I was just sitting there. Did not do anything wrong." "You are not in trouble," Lenora assured him. "We think you might have witnessed police misconduct." "I do not get involved with police business," Walter said firmly. "Learned that lesson the hard way." Darius stepped forward slightly. "What lesson, Mr. Grayson?" Walter hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come inside, but I am not promising anything." They sat in Walter's living room, which was decorated with military photos and commendations. Walter poured coffee without asking if they wanted any. his hands steady despite his obvious nervousness. "Officer Price pulled my grandson over 6 months ago," Walter began quietly. "Tyler was driving home from work, doing nothing wrong. Price claimed he smelled marijuana, searched the car, found nothing. But then he got in Tyler's face and said next time he might not be so lucky. Said things could go badly for young men who did not show proper respect." Walter's jaw tightened. "Tyler was so scared he would not drive alone for weeks. Asked me to follow him places. A 19-year-old boy, afraid of police in his own neighborhood." Darius felt the familiar weight of recognition. Price used fear as a weapon, targeting people he thought could not fight back. "That is why I do not get involved," Walter continued. "Price knows where I live, knows my family." "Mr. Grayson," Darius said carefully, "yesterday Price and his partner planted drugs in my car. They did not know I was a federal agent, but this is not the first time they have done this." He told Walter about Marcus, about the 15-year pattern of false arrests, about families destroyed by planted evidence. "I understand being afraid," Darius said, "but we have a chance to stop them from doing this to anyone else's grandson." Walter was quiet for a long moment, studying Darius's face. "You really think you can make it stick?" Walter asked finally. "If we have proof," Lenora said. "Clear, undeniable proof." Walter stood up slowly and walked to a desk near the window. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small memory card. "My dash camera was running," he said. "Recorded the whole thing." He handed the memory card to Lenora. "I saw that officer pull something from his vest, saw him slide it under your seat, saw the other one block their camera with his body." Lenora immediately inserted the memory card into her laptop. The footage loaded quickly, showing a clear view of the arrest from across the street. On the screen, they could see Sloan approaching Darius's car, his left hand moving to his vest pocket, then sliding something from it as he leaned down near the driver's door. The planted bag came directly from Sloan's vest, captured in perfect detail. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension that afternoon. Lenora had moved fast, using emergency procedures to get an immediate hearing before Judge Patricia Hamilton. The courtroom filled quickly with reporters, federal agents, and local police officials who still believed they were watching a corrupt DEA agent get exposed. Darius sat at the prosecution table beside Lenora, wearing a clean suit and projecting calm authority. Behind them, Ruth held herself with quiet dignity, flanked by Detective Mara Ellison and Walter Grayson. Walter kept glancing nervously at the defense table where Price, Sloan, and Captain Mallory sat with their attorney. Judge Hamilton called the hearing to order. "This is an emergency proceeding regarding alleged misconduct during the arrest of Special Agent Darius Whitaker. The government may present its case." Lenora stood slowly. "Your Honor, before we present evidence, we would like the defendants to testify under oath about the events in question." Price's attorney objected, but Judge Hamilton overruled. "Given the serious nature of these allegations, I will allow testimony from the arresting officers." Officer Nolan Price took the stand first, his confidence restored by the formal setting. He wore his dress uniform and spoke clearly to the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, I conducted a routine traffic stop after observing a broken taillight. The defendant became immediately hostile and refused to comply with lawful orders." Lenora let him continue without objection. "During a lawful search of the vehicle, Officer Sloan discovered a sealed bag containing what appeared to be narcotics beneath the driver's seat. The defendant then produced what looked like a federal badge, but the credentials appeared suspicious." Price looked directly at the judge. "We followed department procedure exactly. The defendant's behavior suggested guilt from the moment I approached his vehicle." Every word was a lie, spoken confidently under oath. Officer Garrett Sloan testified next, his voice quieter but equally firm. "I found the narcotics package under the front seat during a standard search. The bag was clearly visible and easily accessible. When the defendant showed his badge, something felt wrong about it. The metal looked cheap, and the identification number seemed off." Sloan glanced at Darius. "I have seen real federal credentials. These did not match the standard format." Another lie, delivered with practiced sincerity. Captain Everett Mallory took the stand last, projecting the authority of 3 decades in law enforcement. "Your Honor, my officers responded to a legitimate traffic violation and discovered illegal narcotics. When Special Agent Whitaker produced his credentials, we followed proper verification procedures. At no point did anyone in my department act outside established protocol. Mallory's voice carried conviction. These officers have exemplary records. They were doing their jobs. The courtroom murmured with approval. To most observers, the testimony sounded reasonable and professional. Lenora remained seated throughout all three testimonies, taking notes but asking no questions. Darius watched the lies accumulate, each one creating another federal crime. Finally, Lenora stood. "Your Honor, I would like to present video evidence." She walked to the courtroom's projection system and inserted Walter's memory card. The large screen flickered to life, showing a clear view of Oak Street from Walter's dashboard camera. The courtroom watched Darius's car being pulled over. They saw Price approach aggressively, while Sloan circled the vehicle. The timestamp showed everything in real time. Then, the crucial moment arrived on screen. Sloan moved to the driver's side, his left hand clearly visible as it went to his vest pocket, withdrew a small object, and slid it beneath the driver's seat. The movement was unmistakable and deliberate. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Price shifted in his chair, sweat appearing on his forehead. Sloan stared at the floor, his face pale. Mallory maintained his composure, but his hands gripped the table edge. On screen, the arrest continued. Price blocked the patrol car's camera with his body while Sloan discovered the planted bag. "Your Honor," Lenora said calmly, "the defendants just testified under oath that Officer Sloan found drugs under the seat. This footage clearly shows him placing those drugs there first." She paused the video at the moment Sloan pulled the bag from his vest. "Furthermore, laboratory analysis reveals that the planted evidence contains a DEA trace marker from a federal narcotics shipment that disappeared from the evidence room 6 months ago." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Reporters began typing frantically. "These officers did not simply frame Special Agent Whitaker," Lenora continued. "They accidentally exposed their own drug trafficking operation." Judge Hamilton's expression darkened. "I am issuing immediate federal arrest warrants for perjury, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and narcotics trafficking." Price shot up from his chair and bolted toward the exit. Price burst through the courthouse doors and sprinted toward the parking garage. Federal agents moved immediately, tracking him through radio communication as he jumped into his personal truck and sped toward the industrial district. "He's heading west on Miller Avenue," Agent Rodriguez reported from the pursuit vehicle. "Looks like he's going to the warehouse district." Darius rode in the lead federal van with Lenora and Agent Martinez. His jaw was set, his hands steady. He had studied the evidence tape codes for hours and recognized the shipping patterns Mallory's unit used to move stolen narcotics. "The warehouse at 1847 Industrial Way," Darius said quietly. "That's where they've been storing everything." Lenora checked her weapon. "How do you know?" "The evidence seal numbers from my planted bag match a shipment log Mara pulled from internal records. Mallory's been using that location for 6 months." The convoy of federal vehicles approached the abandoned warehouse as Price's truck disappeared through a loading bay door. The building sat isolated among empty lots, perfect for hiding illegal operations. Agent Martinez coordinated the approach. "Surround the building. Nobody goes in alone. We need everything inside preserved for prosecution." Darius checked his vest and radio. His shoulder still ached from the garage fight, but his mind was clear. This was federal law enforcement, not personal revenge. The team moved through the warehouse's front entrance in formation. Emergency lights cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of cardboard boxes, metal shelving units, and shipping containers marked with false labels. "Jesus Christ," Agent Rodriguez whispered. The warehouse contained a complete drug distribution operation. Clear plastic bags filled with white powder sat beside bundles of cash secured with rubber bands. Falsified arrest reports were scattered across folding tables next to scales, packaging materials, and evidence bags bearing official police department seals. Darius recognized the organization immediately. They've been repackaging seized drugs and selling them back onto the street. Every arrest was feeding the pipeline. In the far corner, Agent Martinez discovered a filing cabinet filled with old case documents. Marcus Whitaker's name appeared on multiple folders alongside dozens of other conviction records dating back 15 years. "Darius," Agent Rodriguez called from the center of the warehouse. "Price is here." Price emerged from behind a shipping container, his uniform torn and his face wild with panic. He held his service weapon loosely, pointing it in different directions as federal agents surrounded him. "You destroyed my life!" Price screamed at Darius. 20 years on the force! 20 years! "Put the weapon down," Agent Martinez ordered. "You're surrounded." Price ignored him, focusing entirely on Darius. "You think you're better than me? You think that badge makes you special?" Darius kept his hands visible, speaking calmly. "Nobody destroyed your life but you, Price. Every choice was yours." "Shut up!" Price lunged forward, swinging his weapon like a club. Darius absorbed the blow on his left shoulder, feeling pain shoot down his arm. He grabbed Price's wrist with both hands and pivoted, using Price's momentum to drive him backward into a stack of wooden crates. Price crashed into the boxes, spilling evidence bags across the concrete floor. Darius maintained his grip on Price's wrist, applying pressure to the joint until the weapon clattered away. "Stay down," Darius said, pinning Price's arm behind his back. Price struggled beneath him, breathing heavily. "You ruined everything. Everything." "No," Darius replied quietly. "You finally met the record you couldn't rewrite." Near the loading bay, Agent Rodriguez discovered Sloan crouched behind a barrel, frantically feeding documents into a portable shredder. Papers scattered around him showed shipment schedules, payment records, and communication logs. "Federal agents, step away from the shredder." Sloan raised his hands, his face defeated. The partially destroyed documents still contained enough information to trace the corruption network. Agent Martinez examined the recovered paperwork. "Captain Mallory's signature is on everything. Shipping authorizations, evidence transfers, payment schedules. This goes all the way to command level." Darius pulled Price to his feet and secured handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked with finality. "Nolan Price, you're under arrest for narcotics trafficking, evidence tampering, perjury, and civil rights violations." Price sagged against the crates, his fight completely gone. Federal agents moved systematically through the warehouse, photographing evidence, sealing packages, and documenting every aspect of the operation. Agent Rodriguez counted cash bundles totaling over $200,000. "Lenora needs to see this inventory," Agent Martinez said, pulling out his phone. "This is the biggest police corruption case the district has ever prosecuted." Darius looked around the warehouse at 15 years of criminal evidence. Somewhere in these boxes were the drugs that had been planted on Marcus, the false reports that had destroyed his brother's life, and the proof that would finally set the record straight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the police department parking lot as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the main entrance. Federal agents stepped out, wearing tactical vests marked with bright yellow DEA letters, carrying sealed warrant folders and evidence boxes. Inside the station, Officer Price sat at his desk, finishing incident reports from the previous night shift. He looked up as Agent Rodriguez entered the squad room with 4 other federal agents. "Nolan Price, you're under arrest." The room went silent. Every officer who had protected Price, covered for him, and laughed at his cruel jokes, watched him stand slowly from his chair. His hands shook as Agent Rodriguez placed handcuffs around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Price's face had turned gray. The same officers who once treated him like family now avoided eye contact. Detective Morrison stepped backward. Sergeant Bell suddenly found paperwork that required his immediate attention. Agent Martinez found Sloan in the evidence room, frantically moving sealed bags from one shelf to another. He froze when he saw the federal agents. "Garrett Sloan, you're under arrest for narcotics trafficking, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations." Sloan dropped the evidence bag in his hand. White powder scattered across the floor as the handcuffs clicked shut. "Please," Sloan whispered. "I have kids." "You should have thought about them before you planted drugs on innocent people," Agent Martinez replied. Outside headquarters, news vans lined the street. Reporters held microphones toward their cameras as federal agents walked Price and Sloan past the windows in full view of the watching crowd. Channel 7's morning anchor spoke directly into her camera. 2 veteran police officers arrested in a federal corruption investigation that has rocked the department. Captain Mallory sat behind his oak desk reviewing budget reports when Agent Rodriguez knocked on his office door. Mallory looked up calmly, his hands folded. "Captain Everett Mallory, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute narcotics, obstruction of justice, and operating a criminal enterprise." Mallory stood slowly, straightening his uniform shirt. Even in handcuffs, he maintained his composed expression, nodding to officers who watched from the hallway. "This department will survive this embarrassment," he told Sergeant Bell as federal agents escorted him toward the exit. Through the station windows, reporters shouted questions about corruption, planted evidence, and how many cases would need review. Mallory kept his head straight, refusing to acknowledge them. Detective Mara Ellison arrived at headquarters just as Mallory was being placed into a federal vehicle. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss met her near the front entrance. "Your suspension has been lifted," Lenora said, handing her a reinstatement letter. "Internal Affairs confirmed you tried to report irregularities in the evidence room months ago. Mallory buried your complaints." Mara accepted the letter with steady hand. "How many cases are we looking at?" The warehouse contained evidence from over 40 arrests dating back 15 years. Every conviction will require review. Inside the federal courthouse, Ruth Whitaker sat in the front row beside Darius, both wearing their best clothes for the emergency hearing. The courtroom filled with reporters, attorneys, and federal agents carrying boxes of evidence. Marcus Whitaker entered through the side door, accompanied by his court-appointed attorney. He looked older than his 41 years, his hair showing gray and his face carrying the weight of 15 years behind bars. Ruth reached forward when she saw him, gripping the wooden rail. Marcus met her eyes and nodded once, his expression guarded but hopeful. Judge Harrison entered, and the courtroom rose. In the matter of the United States versus Mallory and others, and the motion to vacate conviction in Commonwealth versus Marcus Whitaker, Prosecutor Janet Walsh approached the bench carrying a thick folder. "Your Honor, federal investigation has uncovered systematic evidence tampering in the defendant's original case. The narcotics allegedly found in Mr. Whitaker's vehicle bore the same evidence seal series recovered from yesterday's warehouse seizure." She held up the plastic bag that had been planted in Darius's car. "This bag, planted on DEA agent Darius Whitaker, contains a trace marker proving it originated from the same corrupted evidence pipeline that convicted Marcus Whitaker." Marcus sat very still, listening to words he had waited 15 years to hear. The original conviction was built entirely on fabricated evidence. Officer Price, who testified against Mr. Whitaker, has now been arrested for identical crimes. Captain Mallory, who supervised the case, has been charged with operating the criminal conspiracy. Judge Harrison reviewed the federal evidence summary, his expression growing stern. "Mr. Whitaker, please rise." Marcus stood slowly, his attorney beside him. "Based on the overwhelming evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and fabricated evidence, this court hereby vacates your conviction. All charges are dismissed with prejudice." The gavel struck the bench with finality. Ruth gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Darius felt his chest tighten with emotion he had held back for years. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the words settle into his mind. When he opened them, tears ran down his cheeks. Outside the courthouse, Ruth stood between her 2 sons, gripping their hands tightly. The afternoon sun warmed their faces as reporters gathered nearby, asking questions about justice, corruption, and how long the family had waited for this moment. Ruth looked at Marcus, then at Darius. Both men stood straight, both free in different ways. "My boys," she whispered, squeezing their hands tighter. That afternoon, Darius stood outside the courthouse with Ruth Whitaker, Marcus Whitaker, Lenora Voss, Mara Ellison, and Walter Grayson. The steps buzzed with reporters, federal agents, and curious citizens who had followed the corruption story since morning news broke. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lenora Voss approached the cluster of microphones set up near the courthouse entrance. Her expression was professional but satisfied, the look of someone who had just dismantled a criminal conspiracy in open court. "Today marks the end of a 15-year pattern of corruption within the local police department," Lenora announced, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. Federal investigation has uncovered systematic evidence tampering, drug trafficking, and false arrests orchestrated at the command level. She gestured toward the federal agents organizing evidence boxes near their vehicles. The Department of Justice will conduct a comprehensive review of every narcotics arrest connected to Captain Mallory's unit dating back to 2008. We expect dozens of wrongful convictions to be overturned. Reporters shouted questions about the scope of the corruption, the number of victims, and how the conspiracy remained hidden for so long. The courage of witnesses like Mr. Walter Grayson made this justice possible, Lenora continued, nodding toward the 72-year-old veteran who stood quietly beside Darius. Mr. Grayson refused to let fear silence the truth when it mattered most. Walter shifted uncomfortably under the attention, adjusting his worn baseball cap. "Just did what seemed right," he said when a microphone was pushed toward him. "Seen too many good men get crushed by lies." Detective Mara Ellison stepped forward when Lenora mentioned police reform. "Internal oversight failed because corruption reached the command level," Mara said firmly. "Federal authorities have assigned me to help establish independent review procedures. Officers who report misconduct will be protected, not punished." Near the courthouse parking area, 2 federal transport vehicles waited with their rear doors open. Officer Nolan Price sat in the back of one, his wrists cuffed behind him, staring at the ground between his feet. His uniform had been replaced with orange detention clothing. Officer Garrett Sloan occupied the second vehicle, his face pale and drawn. He kept glancing toward the courthouse steps where Darius stood, as if still unable to believe the federal agent he had tried to frame was now watching him be transported to jail. The reversal was complete and visible. The same officers who had humiliated Darius in front of his neighbors were now the ones being placed into custody vehicles while cameras recorded their downfall. Darius noticed Agent Rodriguez carrying a clear evidence container toward the federal van. Inside the container sat the plastic bag that Sloan had planted beneath his driver's seat, now sealed with federal evidence tape and labeled as conspiracy evidence rather than proof of his guilt. The bag that was supposed to destroy him had become the key that unlocked years of hidden crimes. Ruth stood close to Marcus, her hand resting on his arm as he spoke quietly to a reporter about the 15 years he had lost to false charges. Marcus's voice was steady but emotional, describing nights in prison when he wondered if anyone would ever believe his innocence. "My brother never stopped fighting for me," Marcus said, looking toward Darius. "Even when he was facing the same lies, he kept pushing for the truth." Darius felt the weight of vindication settling around him, different from relief or celebration. This was deeper than personal victory. The evidence had spoken clearly enough to rewrite history, clear his brother's name, and expose a system that had operated in shadows for too long. Walter Grayson approached Darius as the crowd began to thin. "Glad that camera was running," the older man said simply. "Sometimes the right thing finds a way to surface." "Thank you for coming forward," Darius replied, shaking Walter's weathered hand. Fear would have let them win. The federal vehicles carrying Price and Sloan pulled away from the courthouse, heading toward detention facilities where they would await trial. Reporters followed the convoy, shouting final questions through rolled-up windows. Darius watched the vehicles disappear around the corner, then looked at Marcus and Ruth standing together in the afternoon sunlight, both free from the shadow that had followed their family for 15 years. This time, the evidence tells the truth. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.